This is Nice Work. I'm Tyler Lake, and let's hear a story. It's not my story, but it is a good one. It's the kind of story people make documentaries or write Atlantic articles about. It involves a landfill, a Hollywood screenwriter, a lot of discarded Atari games, and my guest, Raiford Guins.
We set up processing tables, and my job was when they would bring artifacts up, I had to identify them, which is kind of easy. It says ET. That's an ET cartridge, right?
Back in 2014, Gwen worked with a whole team of researchers and a documentary crew to excavate an almost mythical landfill loaded with vintage Atari cartridges in Alamogordo, New Mexico. How's a thing like that even come about? Well, it starts with a guy who thinks a lot about how we preserve video game history.
I wrote a book called Game After. I had a very simple question. I like to think with simple questions. Where do we do game history? And what I meant was, where do we physically do it? Where do we find materials, evidence, documentation? So obviously archives. Mm-hmm. At the time, Stanford and the Strong had a handful of game collections. So people who were in the industry donated materials. Now those collections have grown profoundly, right? Museums. So there's the original brown bears at the Smithsonian. There's a Pong cabinet there. A lot of libraries were starting to introduce kind of console games to turn this space away from a study space to a social space. Mm-hmm. So, okay, games are in libraries. I want to write about that as well. But I thought, okay, museums in the hands of collectors, super collectors. But I thought, wait a minute, landfills. God, I remember that rumor, sort of myth that Atari dumped all of these unsold copies of E.T., right? And there was a beautiful book called Lucky Wonder Boy, W-A-N-D-E-R, by D.B. Weiss. And there's a scene that stood out to me where he's trying to find this game that he can no longer locate or remember. And it's very clandestine. So he's having a meeting in Alamogordo, New Mexico, with this guy in a long trench coat. They walk out and he has photographs of the machine. They're trying to pass these kind of important documents on. And there's an exchange. And this mysterious character says to the protagonist, "You know where we're standing?" Because I think I do. The vault is underneath our feet. And he's referring to all of Atari's trash.
Atari got pretty far out over their skis in the early 80s. Poor sales of the home version of Pac-Man for their 2600 gaming systems were compounded by only selling 1.5 million of the 5 million ET games they made. Stores sent back scads of unsold games of all sorts, and in 1983, it's reported that between 10 to 20 semi-truck loads of Atari ephemera from their El Paso storage facilities were unloaded into the Alamogordo landfill.
So I took this wonderful kind of fiction, and I thought, you know what, I want to do something utterly crazy. I want to go to Alamogordo and see if this is true, right? So I wrote a piece in a journal called Design and Culture, where I put copies of my ET in a landfill and just photographed them for fun. But I interviewed the local mayor. At the time, I went on a country western morning show. I took an ad out in the Alamogordo Daily News, and they put it in the personals column, which I thought was quite funny. It's like, okay, at that time, 30-something looking for a long-lost, people called in. An old security guard called in, and we talked. Then in Game After, I wrote a chapter. I met a person who recalled taking the games out at the time. So fast forward a little bit. Xbox is doing a documentary. I get an email from Zach Penn, who's putting this documentary, which eventually became Atari Game Over, together. I was still living in New York, so he interviewed me there. And then we went out to Alamogordo to the excavation. And I worked with an archaeology crew. My job was to do photo documentary. And we had an ambitious plan. All the archaeologists, they were talking about, this is going to be pop archaeology. We're doing it for the cameras. We're doing it for a popular audience. So we're going to go through the motions a little bit. What stood out for us was that we saw production runs from 1977 up till around 1982. And I remember this moment very vividly. End of the day, we're tired, we're filthy, we're covered in just stench. Zach Penn has the cameras. What did we do today? Pointing at us, right? What did we do today? I said, well, I jumped into lecture mode and said exactly this. This was never about ET. This is just a company that is just getting rid of its surplus, getting rid of brand new product. It's not just damaged games. Cut. That's not going into my documentary. This is about ET. This is about Howard. Yes. Yeah. The sadness as well. I'm pleased on one hand that they.
Well, I just want to back up.
Yeah.
Let's point out that, to my recollection, I've heard these rumors too. ET was fantastically a failure.
No, it wasn't. I mean,
that's the story. I get that.
And
it was a bad game and a failure, and that's why this happened.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Set me straight.
Okay, I don't know if I am. I will say this. So in the documentary, I have this line, and I don't know if you've seen Atari Game Over. I say,
not, I will, though.
I would rather play Atari's ET than any Call of Duty. That's the line they put in. What I went on to say was, I'd rather play a game about love and sentimentality than U.S. imperialism. They took that part out, right? I got flamed by all of these Call of Duty bros, right? You don't like any of the games? Like, oh God, I just don't respond to that. Here's the funny thing. Why is it such a pariah? Why do we point to that game? I think social media has done the damage on that. When you read reviews at the time, no one's condemning that game.
That's
no one's condemning. And the reviews are in kind of specialist video game magazines. It was never debugged. I mean, that's the shortcomings of it. For me, it's a wonderful learning experience. And if one wants to just kind of, I guess, talk trash about it, fair enough. I think social media has fed that quite a lot. But there are worse games than E.T. on the market. I was one of those people who did receive it as a 12-year-old and played it. It wasn't one of my favorite games, and it was frustrating. You're always falling into they're called wells, but they resemble pits. So it had some shortcomings, no doubt. But I think it's just, a lot of the toxicity online, it likes to have targets it can kind of direct all of that sort of animosity to. And unfortunately, a game from 1982 kind of bears the brunt of it.
I definitely see like the analog to like when Cyberpunk 2077 came out and they hadn't worked the bugs out.
Yeah. And now, I mean, that game's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what a concept for that. But at first, it was just panned because of glitching. I mean, I could make the same case with New Vegas because I had such a terrible glitch. Fallout New Vegas. I had such a terrible glitch, I couldn't move forward in the game. But of course, now games are patched. At that point in time, the patching technology wasn't available, so games were being returned and just not selling at the time. So what was so for us was it was never about a single title. But the story's better if it is about a single title. I get that. We tried to. I mean, it was one of these things that I have to be careful sharing this story because on the day I was uploading photos to Facebook. I wasn't supposed to do that, evidently, but I was sharing a lot of this stuff with, the time when Facebook was cooler, I guess, or funner to be on, right? Back then I was doing that, and colleagues around the world, oh my God, Ray's doing real archaeology, right? Look at these games, the condition of them. Because I'd written pieces trying to imagine what they would look like. I wasn't quite aware of how, in these arid conditions in landfills, a lot of the games, the pages were crispy. I mean, nothing was damp. Everything was legible. You could move, and games played, which was quite fascinating, right? And I was researching garbology, which is kind of excavating contemporary landfills to understand like consumption patterns and this type of stuff. And I think when we were uploading these photographs, we had a chance to tell our story. There were concerns that we would undermine the documentary. There were concerns that what we were showing would not correspond with the narrative. And I'm kind of proud of this personally as a researcher. That narrative had to change. I remember there's a line where Zach Penn says, we found E.T., but we found lots of other games. I don't know if that line would have been included. So I'd like to think that we were able to kind of influence how the documentary covered that history better.
Thanks to Raiford Guins for telling me that story. Raiford and his colleagues wrote a piece about the excavation for The Atlantic that's totally worth checking out. It's called Why We Dug Atari. And Atari Game Over is also a pretty compelling glimpse into the history of Atari and the excavation of the Alamogordo landfill. For Nice Work, I'm Tyler Lake.
And that's our show. You've been listening to Nice Work, a production of WFIU, WTIU, and Indiana Public Media. Find us at ipm.org.
This episode was produced and edited by Alex Chambers. We get production help from Danny William, Holly Wilkerson, Carl Templeton, Leo Pies, Jillian Blackburn, and Jonah Ballard.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Alan Davis, additional music from Universal Production Music. The executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Nice work, Alex.
Nice work, Kate.